Welcome to College Admissions Toolbox, giving you the edge you need to get into the colleges of your dreams, with your host, Steve Schwartz. That's me. Today, we're talking with Jeremy Schwartz. Welcome to College Admissions Toolbox, Jeremy. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. It's good to be here, Steve.
Thanks so much for being on the show. Now, you've got quite a background. You've interviewed students at Columbia as an alumni interviewer. You're also a psychotherapist in Brooklyn. And you also happen to be my brother. So
yep.
Tell us a little bit about your journey and about you personally and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so right now I'm a therapist. I have a practice in Park Slope and Brooklyn Heights here in New York City. And that I got there really through the social work route. I did a master's in social work at NYU, did a lot of policy and research while there, but ended up really finding that the clinical work was what was exciting to me. And I didn't always know that this was a field I wanted to go into. When I was in high school, I knew I wanted to go to a great school. I knew that I wanted to be in a large city and wanted to have a lot of opportunities open to me and really just keep the door open. And so I ended up applying to Columbia Early Decision, got accepted, and studied Spanish while I was there. I loved language. I loved the experience of getting to know a culture through its literature, through the way that people communicate with each other. But then as I was getting closer to graduation, I realized that I also wanted to do something where I felt like I was having an impact, where I felt like I was making a difference in the world, making a difference in people's lives. And social work appealed to me because it was so broad in scope, and there were so many different ways that I could do that. So I ended up going right into grad school after college, chose NYU because I loved being in New York City, and then, not that long later, here I am.
Oh, wow, Jeremy, that's quite a story. So you got accepted to Columbia for undergrad, then you got into NYU for social work. No, NYU for social work is also one of those top programs. Was there a pivotal moment in your time at Columbia or during your time in high school when that really made the difference in your admission, from your understanding?
As a high school student, I was a more traditional applicant to Columbia, where I had the high grades, I had the SAT scores, I was doing a lot of extracurricular activities, sort of following the by-the-book plan of what you're supposed to do to get in. And there were some unique parts of my application as well. Like you, I got involved in some United Nations conferences, did a lot of political and community work. I interned for a local member of Congress. But I also was kind of spreading myself really thin, and in a way that if I had to do it over again, I may not have. Where I tried to be the president of every high school club, tried to just do everything you were supposed to do to get into college. And it worked. I got in. But at the time, I never really felt like I was developing a passion for anything in particular. I was kind of just trying to be everything, do everything. And I don't think that's the only way to do it, and I don't think that's the best way to do it. Looking back, I really would have wanted to focus on something that's important to me and really develop myself in a particular area and be able to trust that would be good enough for the schools, that I wouldn't need to prove everything with a long list of achievements, but rather have a more narrow focus. During my time at Columbia, I started to realize that while I was there, I was at this Ivy League school with tons of opportunities and could kind of go in any direction. There was no longer that sort of clear path that a lot of high school students get where you just, you're supposed to follow this formula and it's supposed to have a certain outcome. There was a lot more opportunity to choose what I really wanted to do. And that, in some ways that could kind of be overwhelming because then how do you know which direction to take? But I decided to just go with what I wanted and not worry about, if, I could be in a field where I was making more money, or I could do something that looks more prestigious, or I could go into a profession that maybe, family or friends or other people would approve of as like, well, this is a field where, people will know that you're successful or that you're making a lot of money or that you're really using this Ivy League degree, but to actually do what I wanted and to actually do what made sense for me and what was in line with my values and that I could feel really passionate about.
Well, that's really valuable insight, in my opinion, Jeremy. The idea that, you had that free time during college. You didn't have that preset path to follow, and that kind of just let you explore. And you found something you loved and were good at, and you pursued that all the way. And it worked out. You got into what I think is, one of the top MSW programs.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've had a successful career at, Mount Sinai, and now you've got a successful private practice, and you're doing what you love. So
exactly.
It does work out in the end. Even not just doing things by the book as you're supposed to. If you just kind of open yourself up to those opportunities, you can discover something you love and are good at, and follow that all the way. So I think it's a really valuable lesson that you just shared with us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the key is that whatever path that is, it's not something that anyone else can tell you. People can help you figure out what's important to you. People can help sort of listen to where you really seem passionate, or where you tend to devote your energy. But then you have to develop that. Even if other people have lots of other advice for you, or think you should be doing something else entirely, that it really has to come from you.
Yeah, no one can really tell you what to do. People can offer suggestions and guidance, but at the end of the day, you're the one living your life. You've got to kind of forge your own path and take charge of that a little bit. Now, I know that you went to Columbia and you've interviewed current applicants, students who are applying to Columbia today for undergrad. I'm wondering if there are any stories you can share, any worst moments you've seen or experienced, interviewing a student. Share with us one of those moments in time.
Yeah. So I really enjoy interviewing students who are applying to Columbia. It's a chance to get to know young people who are developing those passions, and who often have a lot of energy, or are very intelligent, very motivated. And it's a chance where I can share some of my experience as an alum, but also really get to know them. So it's something I enjoy doing. Fortunately, this year I was just so busy getting my practice off the ground that I wasn't able to. But a couple of years back, I did a number of interviews, and one student sort of stands out in my mind as really trying to prove herself. She came in with this portfolio of a lot of her work, and was showing me like artwork she had done in photography. And unfortunately, sort of the tone that I got from meeting with her was, I've done this, and this, and that's why I should get in. And what I think was missing there was, well, first of all, I was there volunteering my time, and I didn't really, I wasn't really worried so much about, whether or not she should get in. I was more interested in, well, what's this person about? What's important to them? And maybe what might they add to the community? Where might they fit in? And would Columbia be good for them? Would they be good for Columbia? But I didn't, not in the sense of evaluating or judging, or, it's not even my decision. I write a narrative evaluation after each of these interviews, a few paragraphs about my impressions. And, there's a numerical rating that comes in as well, just to give the admissions committee a sense of sort of to what extent I think they should get in. But meeting with the student and being told, and that's why I should get in, just didn't really feel like we were establishing a relationship. It didn't really feel like she was interested in knowing anything about me. It didn't feel like she was curious about the school or about my experience. And that lack of curiosity, unfortunately, was kind of what bombed the interview in my impression, where it was more about proving something than about being open and being curious.
That's really interesting to me. The idea that, the student just comes to you and is kind of pitching themselves.
Exactly.
It almost sounds like she was bragging in a way.
Yeah, and there were sort of that combined with bringing in this portfolio. And I know there's not a right or wrong answer about bringing things to an interview or sending material to an admissions committee. And I think it's more about how you do it than if you do it. Because sometimes people have music or artwork or something unique that it does make sense to share. But yeah, it kind of felt like I was meeting with a sales rep. Someone who was trying to get me to sign up for something or to get me to buy something. And I mean, that wasn't the experience I was looking for in going there that day and in doing this as a volunteer.
It's a really powerful nugget. I mean, it's getting that, they're, sure, of course, they have to present themselves in the best possible light. If you're a student, you should do that in a way. But at the same time, the interviewer is a human being.
Yes.
And you can think about, why is the interviewer taking on this job? I mean, Columbia is not paying you. to be an alumni rep or an alumni interviewer, right? Like you're doing this because you care about the school and you care about who goes there, and it's part of the legacy of your degree and your time there. So one thing you mentioned that really stood out to me was the idea that, is this student right for Columbia? Not just, is this an impressive person, but, Columbia's philosophy, what Columbia values. I mean, obviously you spent, 4 years there. You have a sense of Columbia's personality in a way.
Exactly. And if you think of the university as having a personality, then I think what you're really trying to do when you apply, when you write your essay, when you go for the interview, is to establish a relationship with this institution, with this persona of whatever school it is. And when you're establishing a relationship, sure, you're sharing a lot of yourself, but you're also getting to know the other person. And I think that curiosity and that openness and that willingness to explore sort of this person or institution you're getting to know, but also a willingness to open up and be vulnerable yourself, and a willingness to be curious about yourself and to show that you don't know everything, and that you're at a certain point in your journey, you're meeting this person or this institution, and you want to see how the two might go together.
Sure. I mean, if you're in high school, it's okay to not be a fully formed human being who knows everything and, presenting yourself as like the perfect 17-year-old or perfect, 18-year-old, and you're going to grow at college. You're going to develop as a person. You're going to walk into class freshman year, and you're going to have to be open-minded and curious and willing to learn. And one thing you said that really stuck out to me, Jeremy, was the idea of vulnerability.
Yes.
That, you're not perfect. You've made mistakes during your time in high school. Everyone has. If you haven't, you're lying. If you say you haven't, you're lying. Or you haven't tried to do enough, because we all make mistakes. And, failure is part of growth. And being willing to expose that vulnerability just a little bit is going to make you come across as a human being, not a robot. And the interviewer will like you more for exposing that vulnerability, sharing it with them, and realize, sharing the idea that, you have something to learn and you have learned from your mistakes. If you've never made a mistake, you haven't necessarily had a learning or growth opportunity.
Yeah, and to me, that vulnerability and that openness is so much more impressive than a portfolio or resume or a list of accomplishments. I'm thinking now about another student I interviewed who I don't remember much about her resume or her accomplishments at this point, but what I do remember is her telling me about her experience growing up in her community. She lives in a very poor neighborhood in Brooklyn, on a block where many of the men have gone to prison, where she's seen violence happen, where people in her family have been victims of violence. And I remember talking with her about what that was like for her, being in high school, doing everything she's done while living in that environment and while experiencing trauma and experiencing loss, while at the same time being able to succeed academically and doing everything else she's done. And that really stood out for me, that this is someone who's had life experiences and is able to talk about them and is able to reflect in a very open way about how those experiences have impacted her certainly in the difficult ways, but also in how she's grown through them.
Sure. I mean, that ability to reflect, displays a sense of maturity that I think will impress anyone. So I'm really glad that you're pointing this out. Someone who presents themselves, I'm just contrasting this student to the first student you mentioned, who kind of was very polished and salesy. And if you present yourself as knowing everything, then I'm going to ask myself, why do you even think you need to go to college? Maybe you're so impressive, you already know everything. Just go out there in the world and be successful already. I want students to go to a college where they're going to be willing to take on new challenges and even change their mind about something during those 4 years.
Sure, and I like to think of the interview as sort of a practice run for when that student is at college in the freshman dining hall, sitting down with another student. What kind of conversation will happen? How will they present themselves then? Or what will they talk about? And So if someone comes to me and they're so polished with a portfolio talking about, everything perfect about them and why they should get in, I'm thinking, well, if you're going to go to school and talk to people that way, how are you going to connect with them? Or will you really fit into this community? Will you take part in creating community amongst your first year class? So I prefer the more casual approach where still, of course, you want to be professional, you want to be appropriate and respectful, but talking about what you don't know or about what you want to know is to me far more impressive than talking about what you already know.
Sure, no, definitely. I'm wondering though, we talked a bit about students who make the mistake of selling themselves too much and bragging and presenting themselves as perfect. I'm wondering about the other end, are there any students or folks you've worked with in your private therapy practice who are, have the opposite problem where they're not good enough at displaying their accomplishments and presenting themselves in the best possible light?
Yeah, there's this common thread that I've seen recently amongst several of the young people I'm working with as a therapist, where there's this sort of need to be perfect, or something that they've learned over time, whether through your family, through school, something sort of absorbed, that if you don't come across as perfect, you're not good enough. Is sort of this sort of core belief that impacts a lot of what happens. I've worked with clients who feel like they can't raise their hand in the classroom because what if they say something wrong? What if they don't have the right answer, or they have the right answer but it doesn't come out in the perfect words? What will people think of them? And it gets in the way of being able to raise their hands at all, and that's something we've been working with. And then I've been working with clients who feel like they need to get perfect grades, and even 1 B on their transcript would sort of be a failure, not just for college admissions or for anything in the future, but even for how they feel about themselves. And what I will often say in those cases is, well, what would it look like to have the balanced life that you want? If needing to get perfect grades means that you're not able to spend time with your boyfriend, or you're not able to get involved in an activity that's really enjoyable to you, then is that the life you want? And what would happen if you actually did the things you were enjoying and then got happy? What would that look like? What would that mean for you? And is it really so bad?
No, that's a good point. I mean, you've got to achieve that balance. Life is not about burning the candle at both ends, getting no sleep. You want to be well-rounded.
Yeah, and that's something that extends not just in high school, but even to once you get to college. I think living the life in high school that's closer to the life that you'll also want to have later on is probably a good habit to start getting into. Because once you sort of convince yourself that you have to get straight A's all the time, that you have to do everything perfectly, and then of course there's also that question of who defines perfect and what does that even look like, but that your idea of perfect, then once you get to college, that's a really hard pattern to get out of. And I've seen that as well in college. People getting so stressed out, so anxious all the time that they're not enjoying the experience, and then actually not doing well academically either, because there's only so far you can continue this for before it just stops working.
Well, sure. Just going back to your own personal experience, Jeremy, you talked about you took 2 very different approaches to get into college and then to get into high school. It sounds like, your process during high school to get that ultimately did lead you to get into Columbia kind of did require getting the straight A's, getting, doing everything, becoming president of a bunch of clubs. And it worked, but it sounds like maybe that was more the burning the candle at both ends strategy. And then in college, kind of took a very different approach, which I would say was the more relaxed approach of just kind of not worrying too much about the grades and kind of just pursuing what interested you. And that led you to get into a top master's in social work program at NYU. So it sounds like either approach could work, but one of them will make you a lot happier in the end. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. Where, in my experience of how I handled, everything I did in high school, it worked based on my goal at the time. Because my goal at the time was to get into Columbia Early Decision, and that happened. But I can't say I enjoyed the admissions process. I remember this countdown of the days until I would find out whether or not I had gotten into Columbia, because at the time that was kind of all I had to focus on. But I think from not enjoying that process so much, from having convinced myself that it was far more important than it was, I must have learned something there. Where then in applying to grad school, it was more just, let's see what happens. I knew I wanted to be a social worker, so I applied to, 4 social work schools in the New York area. And, sure, I could have gone for the top school. I could have said, I want to go to, Michigan or Penn because U.S. News and World Report says that those are the best social work schools.
Sure.
But NYU's up there too. And, there's also Columbia, but NYU offered me a significant amount of scholarship money that I didn't even have to apply to Columbia because the faculty members there told me, oh yeah, we don't have anything like that. So yeah, I chose to find the right balance that worked for me, where yes, NYU, it's a prestigious program. I had a great experience there. I ended up actually being president of the student government in my program. And so I really got to benefit from the experience in ways that maybe I didn't, earlier on because I was so focused on the academics and the grades. But I had to learn that balance, which I think came through experience. But yeah, if I had someone tell me that earlier on, or if I had listened to a podcast like this or your blog or, any of these other great resources, I might have gotten to enjoy myself a lot more along the way while still getting to this successful point.
Well, sure, it's hard. I mean, it sounds like you learned some valuable lessons along the way from your time in high school that you then applied during college. But yeah, I mean, there are plenty of students who can take that relaxed approach in the college admissions process. I myself, I wasn't as diligent a student as you were in high school. And, things managed to work out for me as well. I ended up getting into a very different approach. But there are many students who can learn that lesson of, being a little bit more relaxed when it comes to the grades, achieving that social life balance. You had a very active social life in college, I remember. And, pursuing extracurriculars, that you really care about, that can work in the admissions process too. And I'll say, just from my experience working with applicants, and I'm sure you saw this a bit with some of the interviewees that you had, it's not always about having the perfect GPA. That's not always going to work in the end. There can only be one valedictorian. It's really tough to get a 2,400 on the SAT. If you pursue things that you're passionate about, outside of the classroom, that can really, impress the admission officers too, impress the alumni interviewers, and more importantly, get them to like you and get them to want you at their school.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I think what you're saying there is something that's, maybe even a bit radical in this world of college admissions, but a very important message. Because, for someone who's evaluating all of these applications, they start to look the same after a while. Where, the numbers on the transcripts and the test scores kind of just blend together and only tell you so much. There's only so much you can know from looking at someone's transcript or test scores or, all of these kind of generic applications with lots of numbers on them. But then when you see someone who's a person, who you get to know, they're all people, but you get to know them as human beings, and there's something that stands out where you read that essay or that recommendation letter and you're like, wow, I really want to meet this person. I want them on this campus because I want to get to know them. That's something that can get you into any of the top colleges. And I think, not only does it get you in, but then you're at a point where you've developed a passion for something, where you have, these things that are important to you that you can continue on with once you're in college and beyond, while also getting to really enjoy the process, getting to have meaningful relationships with people around you, and not just spending all of your time studying. The studying is important, but there's so much more to life. And I think the colleges are really there to prepare you for life. And the more you can develop yourself as a person with interests and passions and values and beliefs, that's really what's going to shine in the admissions process.
I couldn't agree more, Jeremy. After a certain point, the numbers matter as they filter to a certain extent, the GPA, the test scores, But after you reach that barrier, in a way, after you surpass that minimum, it's about the other human factors because whether you're an alumni interviewer or you're an admission officer, you want to meet people. You are a human being. You want to admit the person, not the numbers. And that's going to come across more with the experiences the student has had that come across in the college essays, in the recommendation letters, and in the interviews as well. So you're definitely an example of someone who's learned that lesson and shown that. So really appreciate your sharing those stories. I want to shift gears now, Jeremy, moving to my favorite part of the interview, which is the lightning round. I'm going to ask you some rapid-fire questions. You give me some rapid-fire responses. Are you ready?
Okay, I'll give it a try.
Great. What's your number one piece of advice for the college admissions process?
To really let your personality come through. To focus on what it is about you that you want the people reading the application to know, not just to know to impress them, but what you want them to know about you as a person.
Absolutely. Could you share with us one habit that you believe contributes to college admissions success?
To know what you want. And don't just apply to schools because you're supposed to, or you were told that they're good schools, or your family wants you to go there, or your friend said you should go there. Focus on where you want to be and know why you want to be there.
Absolutely. That habit of reflection, and you're kind of checking in with yourself every once in a while and thinking, am I on the path doing something that I want to do? And is this going to lead me to a good endpoint? So definitely valuable insight there. What's one online college admissions resource that you absolutely love?
Online college admissions resource, I would say collegeconfidential.com. I assume they're still around. I know it was huge back when I was applying to schools. What I really loved about that site was the way that it created a community. There were these message boards where people would post about their experience in applying to various colleges, and they would get to know other people who were going through similar experiences and be able to check in for advice or just to sort of see, well, this is what I'm doing. Does this make sense? Or I heard this, is that true? And it was a great way to get information and share it amongst other people who are going through the same process.
Those short forums and message boards are a great way to get advice straight from the students themselves, not just the college brochures.
Right.
So that's important. What's one book that you believe no college applicant should be without?
So I'm going to turn this question on its head a little bit, and I'm going to say that every college applicant should have a book that they're passionate about, that really speaks to their experience, and that you can talk about, maybe even in interviews. Because going back to that idea of the interview as being a place to develop a relationship, part of how we develop relationships with people is by sharing our stories. And books can sometimes give us that opening into an aspect of our own experience or a story that we really feel will tell something about us. And so I would say to anyone out there going through this process, as you're reading, as you're developing your interests and developing your passions, notice if anything you're reading really speaks to you, and think about how you could talk about that book in a way that would share not just, well, look what I read, I'm so impressive, I read all these great books, but I read this book and it really spoke to something about my experience.
Yes, talking about a book and what it taught you and how you developed as a person as a result of it, again, that reflection displays maturity, which they're going to love. Definitely. Great insights there. Thanks, Jeremy. So what are you up to these days? I know you started your private practice. What's next for you? I
would say what's next for me is working on writing a book. And that's something I've become very excited about. Right now, the area that is really speaking to me and that I feel like I could write about is this concept that I mentioned earlier of curiosity. Something I see a lot in my practice is that when people have this openness and this curiosity about themselves and about other people, it plays a really significant role in the capacity to have empathy, but also in how people develop relationships. So really that's been a theme in our conversation today, probably because it's been on my mind in so many different things I've been working on. And so this concept of empathic curiosity, how being open and vulnerable and curious about yourself and about the world really plays a role in your relationships. That's an idea I'm developing, and I could see a book coming out within the next year or so.
Well, awesome. Well, I'm very excited about it, and you'll have to keep us posted on how that comes along and when you release it. We'll definitely
absolutely
have you back to talk about it.
Sure.
Where can folks find you online?
Yeah, so my website is www.parkslopetherapy.net. That's the address for my practice. I can also be reached by email, jeremy@parkslopetherapy.net.
Well, great. Well, we'll link to parkslopetherapy.net and your email in the show notes for this episode. Thanks so much for joining us, Jeremy. Have a good one. Take care.
Yeah, thanks. Really enjoyed it. Take care.
One of the hardest things about the college process is finding the money to pay for it all. I was only able to get the scholarships I needed after I figured out how to present myself and what I'd done in the best possible way. So now, I want to give you a free worksheet I made. It's based on my experience working with thousands of high school students. I'm sharing it with you because I really think it's going to help you turn your achievements into scholarship money. So get your free worksheet at www.collegeadmissionstoolbox.com/scholarship. Thanks for listening to College Admissions Toolbox. Head over to www.collegeadmissionstoolbox.com to get more free tools and resources that will help you get into the colleges of your dreams.